It's time to free your mind and your soul. Yo, half the story has never been told. Ladies, you got to demand what you want, and what we want is respect, right? Yo, just sit up on the track, I know so you have to feel it right. Freedom every time for the sisters. Check this. Watch this.
Here we go now. Listen, if I'm boom boom rule, I be the ruler like Slick Rick. Get with this wick with it, Adidas wearing chick. Papa got a brand new bag. Mama got a brand new Jag or go tag. I ain't no old hag. I represent not only in the kitchen, in the bedroom, but also in the boardroom. So give me more room. Deny my opportunity, you in jeopardy. Yo, set me free, don't hinder me, let me be.
I'm fighting for freedom, I got the heat in case you need them. Straight soldier, ain't nobody told ya. Hold up on them lies, I know your games and your plans.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Book Slam Extra. I'm your host Jules. I hope you have all had a really lovely week. It's been a fabulous week so far. I've been managing to sort out some ideas in my own writing, which has been quite helpful because I've been stuck on a bit for a while. Anyway, my name is Jules. I'm going to be your host this evening, and I am an author. Sort of dabble a little bit in poetry, but I wouldn't call myself a poet. I write dark fantasy for both adults and children, with elements of sword and sorcery, Dungeons and Dragons, science fantasy, things like that. I'm very interested in mental health and trauma recovery and how trauma can impact someone's life. So that tends to be embedded as part of my books as well. You can also find me here every week. This is going to be our regular slot now on a Sunday at the same time across the globe. So you can find us here live on YouTube. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you just want to listen, then we are also on Clubhouse. But YouTube is the main place that we happen to be. If you want to get involved, by all means, hop into the comment section. Say what you like, ask questions. We like our audience to get involved with what we're talking about on here. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask, or if you want to just, say something. We've had some really interesting comments. Last Thursday was a blast. What else? I also run a small Discord server. It's in the process of being developed, but it's specifically for authors, writers, poets, and beta readers. So if you are interested in joining that, again, let us know in the comments, and one of us will be in touch and to talk to you about it. And I'm going to just welcome my lovely co-host, and then my other two lovely co-hosts. Hang on a second. Oh, hello, Adam.
Hi. Bring everybody on.
I was, but because the order I've got is, I have to do it separately. Hang on a second.
Yay!
Hello, everyone. Yes. How are you doing?
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday to you all.
Indeed. Have you all had a nice weekend?
Yes.
Without it. It's festival season. I mean, you can't beat it.
Yeah, all this allergies. I'm dealing with allergies today, so if you hear me sniffling, I got my water, and I'll be dipping out a little bit to go get something for it. But yeah, but it's been a great weekend. I took pictures this weekend, so that always puts a smile on my face.
Nice. Yeah, you were talking about that on Thursday, actually.
Yes.
So yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Adam?
I've been productive. I've done some writing. I've done some stuff around the house. So yeah, it's been good.
Wonderful. And Reese, I think you mentioned, didn't you, briefly at the very beginning that you had a nice weekend? But did you have a nice weekend?
Yes. I actually went to so they've combined two of the festivals. So I was at the festival / Chicago Square Festival yesterday. The weather was pretty nice. It was nice outside.
It was warm here.
I'm sorry.
Well. Yeah, I say it was warm here as well, but it's raining on and off all day again today. So, but yeah, do you know what? It's been a really chilled weekend. I can honestly say I haven't done very much. But I have dipped into Mass Effect now that we've been talking about it a little bit. So I'm like, oh, I remember these characters. So yeah. That and just the boring housework.
Something's happening in the background. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to share the YouTube link, and you know me, I've got allergy all going on because I'm trying to make sure everybody gets the word out there. Well, they need to see us today. It's Sunday.
They absolutely do, and what a delight it is to have all of you here. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Afternoon. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and we're this is our now regular weekly slot rather than Thursdays, which I think is a bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. And also it means that more people can get involved, which is fabulous. Now, there are a couple of things that we talked about at the very end of last Thursday's one, but I just wanted to say at the very beginning here. So there's a few things that we're doing, isn't there? We're doing Black Screen Stories, which we're in the process of developing. So if any of you horror fans out there are interested in having audio books to listen to, we're on YouTube. That's what we're in the process of actually creating. So watch this space for that. We're also, Adam, you do an amazing job at this one. I'm going to nominate you again because you just do it so perfectly. Did you want to tell everyone about our competition that we're running?
We're hosting a competition, a writing competition. It's a short story and poetry competition of 1,000-word limit or less. That's what we're going for. And we are celebrating creativity. The winners of the competition are going to be published in a compilation book where it'll all be published together. And to have it a cohesive idea, we're going to ask that everyone in their 1,000 words present these 3 themes. We want a wolf, a magnifying glass, and the outer rings of Saturn. That can mean whatever you want. You can have them be exactly those things: a magnifying glass, a wolf. Whoa, there I am, and the outer rings of Saturn. Or you can be esoteric and make them mean something else. I like the idea that somebody might, as I've said before, use those things to be cocktails on a drink menu or reference points in a sci-fi adventure where you're traveling through space. So be creative. Use those 3 elements: a wolf, magnifying glass, and the outer rings of Saturn, and be creative. Give us 1,000 words or less, and yeah, the winners are going to be published. The book is going to be sold eventually, and we're going to use 15%. We're going to donate 15% of the proceeds back to the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit that works with suicide prevention among LGBTQ+ youth. So we love them, and yeah, so we've supported them before, and we're doing that. So yeah, everybody can come back on the screen because now I've just been rambling. But yeah.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much for that. Now we've also got 2 wonderful guests with us today, haven't we? So should we bring them onto the screen? So it's going to be a little bit crowded, I think. But 1 second. Welcome to the stream. We've got Pat. Hello, Pat.
Hello, Pat. And make sure you unmute your microphones.
Hi.
Yeah, perfect. Uh-oh.
Fiddling around with the mute. No, it's okay. Pat, are you able to click the microphone image on your image on the screen? Hey. Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure having you both here.
Thanks for joining us. Claire, would you like to go first? You want to introduce yourself, Claire? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing. Let's just jump in.
I'm getting to be a bit of a regular on here now. This is my 4th time on. My name's Claire, and I am an Australian author. My first book was published in August last year, and the sequel to that is coming out on the 8th of April. So I'm very excited about that. I usually write queer romance, but I'm sort of starting to dabble in a bit of darker stuff at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being
Very
here.
cool.
And Pat, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Thank you. My name's Pat Rullo, and I write kind of dark things because I write about healthcare safety. Yes.
Wow.
Sometimes that's rather dark as well. Yeah, so I've written several books about how to be a patient advocate, how to survive a hospital stay, healthcare acquired infections. So yeah, I'm more of a nonfiction writer. Although my fantasy would be to write cozy mysteries because I have 13 cats. So I know I've got that aspect taken care of.
That's so awesome.
You have 13 cats.
Thank you so much for being here also.
Yes, they found me.
Oh, thank you both for being here. So we've we've kind of chosen the topic to talk about today. Is how to start writing. I've kind of left it as a more of an open sort of topic because everyone has their own methods and their own reasons for writing, own desires for outcome. And some people just want to write for them, and some people want to write for other people. And sometimes I know from experience when you sat in front of a blank page, whether it be on a computer screen or a notebook, it's a bit daunting. It's almost like, what is that first word? Because you hear so frequently about that first word, that first sentence needs to be a hook and it needs to grab you in. And that could be quite scary when you've never done anything. And it can actually put a lot of new authors off, particularly because they feel maybe inadequate or a bit like they're not going to match what's already out there. And there's some fantastic independent authors, and I really do think that there's a lot of independent authors out there that just don't get the accolade that they should. And there's some really good published authors out there as well who also don't get the accolade. But there's also some authors out there that aren't as good who have been published by one of the big, large publishing companies. And I think that can also put authors off, particularly if they feel that their writing is really good, but then they get rejected lots of times. And then they look at what else is out there, and then they're like, well, if that person's got published, but mine hasn't, and I think my writing is better than theirs, what does that say about my writing then? So it can really be a crisis of conscience, I think. So I wanted us to have a little bit of a delve into that and talk about how we start writing. And if you would like to do some reading from your work, that would be amazing. And that's an offer open to all 5 of you. So Claire, you've been on here before. Pat, this is your first time. Hopefully not your last time as well, if you like us. But what we do is if an author wants to read from their work, we normally give them the full screen. They get the entire time to read what they want for however long they want. And we can talk about it afterwards, but we don't have to. If you don't want to read anything, that's completely, absolutely no problem at all. And we don't have, there's no bar on here, is there, about what can and can't be read? So fiction, non-fiction.
We welcome everything and everybody. That's right.
Yeah, we welcome everyone. So
I wasn't prepared for that, so I don't even have a copy of my book with me.
No, you're fine. It's your input would be just as important. So
our discussions are definitely a primary part of our show.
Sure. Absolutely. We've had a couple of authors on here before who didn't really want to read, so that's fine. So it's like we said, we try and be as welcoming as we can, and as accommodating as we can. So, all right. I'm going to do an open question to all 5 of you. And what I'm going to do is if you start talking, because I've got control of the cameras at the moment, I might put you up on the screen just so that it has like a slightly different view, like to look at. That makes sense. Rather than it's just
like you did to me without warning at the beginning. No, totally. We got it.
No, you have to give me that. Sorry.
You're fine, Adam. You're a spoken guy.
Yeah, that is very true. So I'm going to do an open question to all 5 of you. How do you begin writing? What do you do? So yeah, please feel free to jump in. This is not specifically aimed at anyone in particular. And
I'll go first.
Go on, Melanie.
Because I might have to dip out. But when I first started writing, mine was actually a journal to myself, because mine is nonfiction as well. So I started writing as, what would I say to myself about what I was going through, what I was dealing with. And when I decided to make it into a book, I redid the first chapter because I wanted to introduce people to who I was. So I actually redid the first chapter to just say, who is Melanie and why do you need to read this book? What is this person all about? So it was easy for me to start the journal part, but the writing part, I didn't know how to make people understand why I was writing and with the importance of it. So I rewrote the first part to say, okay, this is me. I'm weird. I'm unorthodox. I'm a little bit crazy, but that's okay. I'm not by myself. I'm not alone. And I know some other people share some of the same things that I've done. And just starting with that disclaimer, a lot of people have, contacted me and told me that they relate to exactly what I said and what I put in my book.
Yay. And we love the madness and the craziness. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's really interesting because actually you've done autobiography and done poetry that relates specifically to you. That's very personal. But Pat, you also do nonfiction as well. So, is there a particular way? I'm just going to pop her up. Is there a particular way that you would start your book? Because obviously, fiction and nonfiction have very different starting points, I think.
Right, exactly. Very similar to what she said is that I just felt like I had to write this. It was a chronicle of a situation that my mom was in the hospital, was having a heart attack that went undiagnosed for 9 hours during a shoulder surgery, and nobody recognized it, and no one ever told me about it. And so we were in the hospital for 4.5 months. I knew what went on because a doctor who I didn't know found me in the hallway the second day, pulled me into a small conference room, and he handed me a manila envelope and closed the door. And he said, "This stinks, and you need to do something about it." So obviously, with great trepidation, I opened up this envelope, and inside were EKG rhythm strips, the squiggly lines. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I had no idea what they meant, but I didn't have to know what they meant because a third grader could have figured it out. Across the top in English, it said acute myocardial infarction in progress. And every time I looked at the next one and the next one and the next one, each one said basically heart attack in progress. So from that point on, I knew what went on. No one knew that I knew. And it was just a horrible 4.5 months that left her totally disabled. Finally, she was able to make it home only because I was there, not because I knew what I was doing, but just because another human being was there to be the eyes and ears and ask the questions. And so about 6 months after that, I started almost having PTSD. All the strange things that happened would come to my mind, and I was getting angry. I lost my insurance license. I had an employee benefits company because I couldn't get my continuing education because I was spending 4.5 months in the hospital. So I was very angry. And one day I just started to write about it, and it hit me. It's like, oh my gosh, if this is happening to me, it's got to be happening to other people. So I started to put all this down. And as I was doing it, I was doing heavy research into all of the hospital-acquired infections, for example, that came my mom's way, MRSA and C. diff and all kinds of different ones, that bed sores and all those kinds of things. So my book was written because it was almost a cathartic thing for me to do for myself. But once I was in the process, I realized I needed to get it out there and couldn't wait for a publisher. I had to self-publish, get it out. And as soon as I got it out there, I was getting requests for speaking events and speaking engagements. And that started to just snowball, and it led to radio, and one led to another. It was nothing that I ever planned on doing. Like I said, I just felt like I had to start the writing process, and it's led me to all the things that I'm doing today. So kind of a blessing in disguise, just to pay attention to what I felt I needed to do at the time. And it's helped so many people just from the radio shows and the books. People get back to me and say, yes, I've been through this. My family's been through it. And so I think it allows people to realize they're not alone.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Really incredible.
It was incredible. Yeah. But the little gem in all of that is, I think, is that when strange things happen to you, you can go down with it unless you don't. And you realize, oh my gosh, there's a little nugget, a little pearl in here, and I need to dig around and find out what that is and why it happened to me and what I'm supposed to do with it. And then it becomes a gift, not right away, but I think eventually, if we could stop and pay attention, that it's not necessarily a bad thing.
So when that was all going on, did you find writing quite a cathartic process, or was it you wanted to make changes, or did you see like an end point with your writing in the sense that once people were able to read it, they might feel better about it or be able to deal with the situation that cropped up in their life?
You were coming in and out. I didn't hear the
Oh,
question.
sorry. I said when you sat down to write, was it quite cathartic as an experience?
Absolutely. Yes. I got it out. And that's what I needed to do. And then during that process, I realized that it could help other people. And so, yeah, I wrote it for me, but then I really wrote it for others as well.
Yeah. Do you feel that when you were writing it, did you aim for it to be out there for other people, or was it specifically for you first?
Yeah, I initially I didn't. It was about halfway through when I just through all the research I was doing. As I was researching, I was realizing that whoa, this was not a singular situation. This is happening to other people. So about halfway through, I thought I need to get this published as quickly as possible because the more time that was wasted, the more people could be suffering or even dying. And just to realize that a patient advocate, somebody needs to be with that patient because the patient can't do for themselves. And so I felt a sense of urgency. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Well, I've got a question. So at the very beginning of your process, like Melanie was talking about a minute ago, she started as a journal to herself. Were you just getting your anger down on paper, or what? How did you what was the really beginning part of it for you? Just the feelings to get down, or?
Yeah, the very beginning part was there were daily occurrences that were just mind blowing that I did not want to forget. And so I that's what I did initially is that I kind of went through because I was taking some notes almost from a legal aspect when it was happening because I realized that there was a situation here that was just way beyond what should have been happening. So yeah, initially what I had on paper were just all the strange experiences that went on and how wrong those were. And then that's when I was able to back up and understand, oh, okay, I understand what that means or why that happened. When she was on a ventilator and they were talking about Klebsiella, like, I don't know, I thought Klebsiella was some fancy woman who was going to show up. I didn't know that Klebsiella, I didn't realize that was a bacterium, and no one ever told me these things. And so I just wanted to get that down so that I didn't forget. And then I was able to research and flesh it out and put it into context so that people could understand.
Wow. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oh, man. Wow. I'm sorry you went through this also. Jeez. But like you said, the little nugget, the silver lining, the being able to share this and make an impact on other people. Yeah. Wow. Exactly. Really powerful.
It was powerful because they told my mom when she got out of the hospital that she would be lucky if she would live maybe a year and a half or 2 years. And she lived for over 8 years. And it's truly only because somebody was there. Not that I was a hero or anything. It was just that somebody else was paying attention. So that when they send you home with 1,000 medications and you have no idea what the pink one is or when to take it, there's somebody else that can be organized and say, hey, mom, let's get this little box and put them in. Let's understand why you're taking them, the importance of taking them. But most people don't have that. Or maybe they could or would if people understood the gravity of the situation and why they do need someone like that.
Yeah, advocates are so important. Advocates are so important.
Absolutely. Yep.
One of the things that they do over in the UK is we have when children are going through social services, which would be like CPS, they have advocates already set up ready for them, and the advocates will come to the meeting with all of the professionals, the multidisciplinary meeting, and will basically just speak on behalf of the children, which is, I suppose, a little bit like what you've done. And it's really powerful hearing some of the children's voices that comes through, where you've got parents who have their perspective and professionals who have their effective, and then you've got these children stuck in the middle
Mhm.
who are completely incapable of being able to have any say over what happens. And so, yeah, I think advocacy is such an important part. But it's sad, in a way, that you need that. I
It's
think
very
that's
sad that you need that, and it's actually gotten worse after the pandemic. The whole healthcare system has just crumbled down to its feet. I mean, it's really rocky now. So if there ever was a time, and then when we weren't allowed to go in, and these poor people were in the hospital and nursing homes by themselves with no one allowed in for infection purposes, well, then you can see why so many people passed away, because there were not that extra set of eyes and ears. And that sounds horrible to say, but it's the truth.
yeah. It's one of those things that, like, we had the NHS over here, which is amazing. And so people pay actually very small fee every month out of their pay slip. They don't even notice it, and that goes towards it. And that means that if they ever need anything, it's free at point of service. So we can go in ambulances, the fire brigade, whatever. No, fire brigade. The fire brigade we don't have to pay for anyway, but we can go in ambulances, or we can go to A&E or whatever we need to have operations and stuff. So we don't have any extra hidden fees we have to pay for, but it's on its knees. And because funding hasn't been put into it, and so there's a system over here called PALS, which is called Patient Advisory Liaison Service, and they are supposed to be like go-betweens between the patient and the hospital, but they don't. Depends on the hospital. So I think advocacy over here isn't something that we tend to have, but it's needed. Um, which is, yeah, it's a really difficult one. You what point was it that you kind of went, I need to write this down? What's the point that you got to from? And obviously, you don't have to like personal stuff, but
Was it immediate at the cardio infarction moment?
Well, yes, because I knew at that point that there was a legal thing that I needed to think about. Clearly, that was not the route I wanted to go. My mom was 78 years old, and legally, they figure someone 78-year-old they're useless. There's no point in they're not going to be generating any income. So if they pass away, there really isn't any kind of loss. So I knew that there was all that in the background. And even that initial incident, I didn't even think about the legal side of it or taking notes. It was when every day things would happen that were just totally bizarre. She would be in bed, and I'd come the next morning and her feet were all bound in gauze. A podiatrist who doesn't even work at the hospital makes his rounds and cut her toenails to the point that they were all bleeding.
wow.
One day, an older man who he wasn't a part of my mom's team, he walked in, and I had bleach wipes on the counter. He had a whole bunch of interns following him, and he said, let me show you how to clean a bed sore. And he went over to my bleach wipes that were on the counter and pulled out 6 Clorox bleach wipes and started to clean my mom's open bed sore on her backside with these wipes of chlorine bleach. And all the interns ran out. And so when these things started to happen on a daily basis, and we're talking about a major hospital here in Ohio, it wasn't a backwoods hospital. That's when I started writing things down just to keep that in track, and so that I could remember some of the things that happened. But then once I got home, and it was so much work, I had to take care of my mom. It was a couple months after that when I started wondering why this happened to us. Why did this happen to her? Why did it happen to me? Because my whole life changed. And that's when I started to think I need to just write to get it out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Very much so.
That's to see a loved one as well being actively treated like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's awful. So did you, when you were writing, did you kind of compile notes initially based off that, and then at some point kind of reached a point where you're like, actually, this could be like all put together and made into a book, or was it like a thought process that you didn't even think about and it just kind of happened that way, or something different?
I think the research is what kicked in when I started doing the research to try to understand what words meant so that I could put it all together like a puzzle piece. I was learning so much, and I was realizing that this was not an isolated situation, that, you know, this was happening. Maybe the healthcare acquired infections is a big thing in hospitals. People get C. diff, and where is that coming from? Well, maybe because people aren't washing their hands. A very basic process of coming in, washing your hands properly before you touch. And I started working backwards, thinking about, you know, the dietary people that would come in and clean off the tray with an old rag that they had in their pocket. Then they would go to the next room and clean that off. And so once I started seeing that these things were a trend, that's when I realized I needed to put it in some kind of book form. And the chapters kind of fleshed themselves out, you know, all different things that happen in hospitals: malnutrition, dehydration, equipment that doesn't work, cross-contamination, just things you wouldn't typically think about. So once the chapters formed, then I did a lot more research to flesh all of those out and built the book that way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because it's almost like it's kind of gone from your sort of notes. I suppose in movies you see it happen like that a little bit, don't you? Where you see like the author who's kind of come up with an idea, and then they make notes on things that happen, and then suddenly the book magically occurs at the end. I'm not saying that necessarily happened, but it is almost that process where you've got things. It's like you want to change the system, you want to change it for the better for people, and people buy into that in the sense that they have probably experienced similar treatment or know someone who has. So that's
right. And then a few years later, then I pulled together, I did an anthology where I reached out to 30 different healthcare doctors, nurses, patient advocates, patients, people in the legal system, and I interviewed them for my radio shows and then transcribed the audio to the anthology. And so that book was titled Highway to Heart, Humor, and Honesty in Healthcare. And that was fun to do because I got all of the different viewpoints from doctors and nurses and aides and patients and family members, and just put that all in one book. And that was a neat project. But then the pandemic came right as that got published. So we had to figure out creative ways to get that out there. So it's always something.
It kind of hit, even though the pandemic itself is something that happens every 100 years or something, but almost a year, isn't it? The last 400 years has been a pandemic or something. We still weren't ready for it. No. We kind of hit everyone. It's been an interesting time though, because a lot of people have found their creativity during it as well, which is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked about that a lot of times, that we process our trauma through creativity in a lot of situations. So everyone was traumatized a little, especially at the beginning of COVID. And I think that we turned to things like poetry and writing and art and different things to help us sort of deal with that. And you know, it's incredibly interesting that Melanie started by telling us her process that she began with a journal. And Pat, you just told us all about this incredible research and this terrible situation you went through, and that led to your book. And can we shift a little bit, Claire? I know that you write in a completely different format, and I wasn't expecting to have these other methods of coming together. So this is so interesting. Do you want to tell us a little bit how your work comes together?
Well, I'm a pantser, so I'm basically the writing nightmare. A random idea will come to me and I'm like, right, there's an entire book, let's do that. The series that I'm publishing now, that actually started with me just writing the first chapter of it and posting it online, thinking that maybe I had sort of finished my writing journey and that I was sort of putting it online to see if there was any interest in the way that I wrote, because I'd been writing on another website previous to that and sort of outgrew it. But I got some feedback on that one chapter, and I had no plans for anything else for the book until I got feedback and was like, okay, I'll continue writing. Because at that point I was like, if no one's interested, I'll stop. If they're interested, I'll keep going. And yeah, that's escalated.
And that's escalated to tell us how many books have you written now?
Oh yeah, a 4-book series. Yep. It was like 101 chapters when I finished writing that story online, and then it's broken up into 4 books. So
nice.
And you've released the first one, and it's available just basically everywhere, Amazon, all those places.
Sort of everywhere, I think. It keeps popping up on new sites that I don't know about, so it's available.
That's awesome. And tell us what it's called.
Do You Ship Us? It's a cheesy boy band romance-y drama thing. It was a lot of fun.
Would you like to read a little bit more to us? Because I know you have read some before. It'd be awesome.
Well, actually today I'm just going to read a chapter from a new book that I'm getting published sometime in the future that is a completely different style to the cheesy boy band.
Tell us all about that first. Before you read, you have to tell us all about that. Definitely.
I don't really know how to describe it. It's sort of like a thriller type mystery, who's the killer type of thing. So that was, and I started writing that one about 12 years ago, and it's taken a long time for me to feel that I'm ready and that I've worked on my craft enough to be able to tell the story properly. So and I'm very excited that's been contracted with my publisher, and it will be coming out sometime in the future, so very soon probably. So I was going to read a chapter of that.
So what happened? Tell us a little bit about the story.
It's hard to explain without giving things away, because there's a lot of like plot twists in it, and obviously because I've been working on it for so many years, I keep adding new little twists in it almost every time I edit it. So at this point, every time I read it, I'm like, wait, what's going on? I don't really remember all of the things that I put into it, which is makes it fun for me.
Right.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Go.
No, I was just going to say, we would love to hear that. So you know the drill by now. Being our wonderful returning guest. Shall I put it on the full screen? You ready to go?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay, so this book is called Secrets, Lies, and Double Lives. And just a quick content warning. In this chapter, there is a description of a murder scene, a survivor appearing to be abducted and held captive, and towards the end of the chapter, there is an attempted overdose. So if you want to avoid that kind of content, feel free to mute me and put on happy music for the next 15 minutes. There's also a lot of sort of flashbacks and memories in this, so I'll try to give a bit of an extra pause to show when it's changing from the present to a memory. Okay, chapter 1, Trapped and Terrified. Waking up in a dark room in a stranger's bed, Elijah feels his body tense and his blood run cold, completely immobilizing him with fear. He blinks a few times, trying to force his eyes to adjust to the darkness that surrounds him as fast as possible so he can work out where he is, or at least how to escape. His head pounds in time with his heart, the sound of blood rushing through his ears almost deafening. Realizing he's panicking, he attempts to control his breathing and calm down. He inhales slowly and holds his breath for a moment to try it, willing himself out of his impending panic. That's when he hears something that sends him cold again. He holds his breath, but he can still hear breathing. Trying desperately to stay calm, he opens his eyes again and stares at the ceiling, concentrating as hard as he can on where the breathing is coming from. The bed beside him feels empty, but the breathing sounds close. He's being watched, maybe even guarded. Elijah gulps and lowers his gaze from the ceiling to the wall opposite him. He can just make out only the wall opposite him that he can just make out, only a few steps from the end of the bed from his guess. Maybe if I just get up and run, Elijah thinks, scanning his gaze over the room again nervously. So afraid that moving will get him unwanted attention, he barely moves his head as he searches for the door so he can escape. Slowly and carefully, he pulls his legs free from the blankets and lets his feet slide off the bed. He takes another deep breath, trying to prepare himself to fight his way out, before he stands up and runs towards where he hopes the door will be. He hears footsteps behind him on the wooden floors and feels a wall before him. It rattles as he hits it, so Elijah feels around quickly for a doorknob, turns it and runs out, slamming the door behind him before turning to see where he is. There's moonlight coming in from a small window above the toilet, and Elijah sighs as he finds he's trapped himself in a bathroom. Quickly, he locks the door and stumbles backwards until he feels another wall behind him. He slides down against it to the ground, shivering in terror as he cowers between the toilet and sink. The person on the other side of the door jiggles the doorknob and bashes on it while yelling something that sounds like gibberish. The sheer fear running through him distorts every sound, making everything but the pulsing of his heart impossible to distinguish. Elijah closes his eyes and brings his legs up to his chest, hugging them tight to comfort himself as he tries to remember how he got here and who brought him here. He'd just gotten home from school to find his house open, but nobody inside, or so he thought. There was an odd smell in the house that Elijah couldn't recognize. All he knew was something's wrong. He'd felt eyes burning into him, but he'd been so focused on finding what had happened and if his family was okay that he hadn't even really thought about whether he was in danger. He'd walked cautiously, looking for his mum and dad, who were normally home at this time of day. There was just something wrong about everything. There was no comforting, homely feeling. He couldn't recognize a single familiar smell or sound, and little things were standing out. The burned smell of his mother's baking lingering through the entire house, and the silence rather than the afternoon news headlines that his parents would have on while they caught up about each other's days over a cup of tea. The feeling of being watched intensified as he wandered up the hallway, but fear kept him from daring to look. He had walked into his parents' room to find it a complete mess. The mirror that stood beside the door was smashed, and the sheets were torn from the bed, pulled off to one side. He gasped at the sight of the normally tidy room, but what caught his attention next terrified him beyond belief. "Please open the door, I won't hurt you," the stranger's voice yells from the other side of the bathroom door. Elijah had momentarily forgotten about the situation he was currently in, and at the pounding on the door he jumps. "Please open the door," the voice demands again, sounding more desperate than aggressive. "You killed my family," Elijah screams back, attempting to sound brave, though he can feel a lump of tears making its way up his throat, forcing his voice to waver. He closes his eyes as he remembers what he'd seen in his parents' room, though as soon as the memories come forward in his mind, he wishes he could forget. The smell of the blood seeping into the carpet around their bodies, their faces pale, eyes open in a blank stare of fear. The image in his mind is torture, but it's so vivid, and all he can think about is his beautiful mum, who he'd barely seen with any expression but an encouraging smile. His dad, protectively holding her in his arms, his white business shirt stained with blood from a series of knife wounds in his back. "I didn't kill them, please. I am so sorry for what you've been through. You must be terrified. Open the door and let me explain what happened to them." And the voice behind the door seems to be more urgent than before. Elijah shakes his head, hugs his legs, and dares to close his eyes again, reliving the chilling discovery. At the sight of his parents' slashed and blood-covered bodies, he had frozen in fear. He covered his mouth with his hands to silence himself, too afraid to make a sound until he could be sure he was safe. After a few long moments of staring at the bodies before him, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing, Elijah took a step towards them, his legs shaking as he neared. He kneeled beside his mother and touched her cheek, horrified to find that she is still warm. For a moment, he wondered if there was any way to resuscitate her, but when he shifted his father to see her injury and saw the wound in her chest, he knew there was nothing he could do. He breathed deeply, becoming aware that in his shock he'd held his breath, then blinked away the tears in his eyes as he bent down and kissed her cheek, whispering a goodbye before gently closing her eyelids. He looked beside her at his dad. He was just as pale as his mum, and the wounds covering his body were undeniably fatal in their multitude. He had obviously put up the best fight he could to protect them. Though his mind was numb, his instinct kicked in, making him feel powerful, or as if he had suddenly got nothing to lose. Coming to terms with the situation, he turned around and searched for a weapon, in case the person who'd killed them was still in the house. With most of the objects in the room broken, he found nothing he could use. Even the broken mirror was shattered into such small pieces he'd barely inflict any damage with even the biggest shard without severing his own hand by holding it. A shiver ran up Elijah's spine as he again felt eyes on him from somewhere. He looked around but saw nothing. He walked back out of his parents' room that was now their tomb. Elijah peered down the hallway and headed towards his sister's room, silently begging that she'd gone to a friend's house after school. The room hadn't been touched, apart from the shoes and school bag that were dumped at the end of the bed. His skin prickled as he stepped slowly towards her wardrobe, hoping he'd find her hiding in there, safe but terrified. He opened the door and gulped. There was nothing but a pile of unfolded clothes, no sign of his sister. Elijah closed the door and turned, half expecting to see the killer, but instead there was nothing but emptiness. Someone was enjoying this horrible little sick game with him. Elijah walked out of her bedroom and down the hallway, noticing photos on the wall were tipped. Some had even fallen to the ground. He hadn't noticed this when he walked in, but if it had happened while he was in the home, surely he would have heard the smash of glass. His senses were raging now, the adrenaline making him more vigilant. He noticed blood on the glass on the floor, then some streaked finger marks on the door to the bathroom. Terrified of what he'd find, he slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. On the floor beside the bathtub, his sister's clothes lay ripped and tainted with blood. He'd taken a deep breath and walked forward, seeing a trail of drops of blood leading into the bathtub, and on the walls behind it were streaks like handprints. There was a noise behind him, and before he could turn to see what caused it, he felt a hand covering his eyes and pull him backwards, with the words, "Don't make a sound," whispered in his ear. Elijah obeyed the order in the hope the person would let him go, but instead a damp cloth smothered his nose and mouth. He struggled for a moment, then heard a loud thump behind him and blacked out. The knocking on the other side of the bathroom door has stopped, but the light is on in the bedroom now, and it's obvious by the shadows under the door that the man is still waiting for him. He can feel the strong and dominant figure's presence on the other side, making him feel even weaker as he sits shivering on the cold tiles. His heart racing as he gulps back his fear and straightens his back a little to make himself feel stronger. "Leave me alone," Elijah screams, and a flood of tears finally pours out of his eyes. He's been trying to be so brave, but he's lost his strength. The memory of what he'd seen was too much for him to handle. He hears footsteps leading away from the door and feels alone. For a moment, he can't believe the guy had done what he said and left, but he's afraid of what might happen next. The stranger might be going to get a key, or could just be testing to see if Elijah will naively believe he's safe to come out. Elijah just hugs his legs tight and rests his head on his knees, then stays still, so terrified he can barely move. It's hours before the footsteps return outside the bathroom. The sun has finally started rising, the morning beams shining in through the window and lighting up the bathroom. Being able to see his surroundings properly, Elijah relaxes a little, content knowing that he is alone, and from what he can tell, he isn't in any immediate danger. Sure, he's trapped, but he isn't having to fight for his life yet, so he's trying to stay calm and rest, containing his energy for when he needs it. He has a sink he can drink water from, and though not very comfortable, he'd rolled up a towel and been resting on the floor using it as a pillow. The early morning air blowing through the tiny window is cold, but there was a bathrobe in the room that he'd pulled on for warmth. It's soft and deceptively comforting. In the time he's left alone, he looks for a way out. Even though he's petite, he's too big to fit through the window. He considers waving a towel out of the window in the hope someone might help him, but from what he can see, the bathroom must be at the back of the house with nothing but dark bushland in sight. If he can just escape, it'd be too easy to run and hide in the bushland. He'd always enjoyed climbing trees and camping in his childhood, so he knows he'll be able to climb one and hide from the evil man waiting for him. He's even picked a tree he can see that isn't far into the bush area, but is tall with plenty of low branches to climb, but a thick covering of leaves he can hide amongst when he gets high enough. Assuming he runs fast enough and climbs fast enough, he's sure he can get to it and hide up in the overgrown branches easily enough until it's dark. Then he can come down under the cover of night and run to the front of the house, where he assumes there must be a street, judging by the few cars he's heard passing by. "Please come out." The voice on the other side of the door is calm as the man again attempts to turn the handle, probably checking on the off chance Elijah might have unlocked it in his absence. "No, leave me alone. Do you need anything? You must be getting hungry or something." "I need whoever the hell you are to fuck off. Leave me alone," Elijah shouts. The silence that follows leaves him to once again do nothing but lie here, contemplating his choices. He doesn't know who is on the other side of the door, but he hates him more than he's ever hated anything or anyone before. Elijah stands up and stares out the window again, trying to think of how to get out there, but the sunlight reflecting off the mirror distracts him. He turns to the mirror above the sink and sighs as he sees how much of a mess he is. His black hair is all knotted, and dirty smears cover his face. On closer look, he realizes they are smears of dried blood, and to his disgust, with no injuries obvious to himself, it doesn't even seem to be his own blood. Figuring he is safe for now, he runs some water and splashes it on his face to clean himself, combing his fingers through his hair and neatening it a little. He cups the water in his hands and drinks some, then looks back at himself, considering his next move. He shakes his head, and sudden frustration boils inside him like an erupting volcano. He draws his arm back, then punches the mirror without hesitation, with as much force as he can muster. With a smash, the glass shatters and falls all over the bench and sink. There are a few longer and wider pieces he could use to fight his way out, but he's not sure whether he wants to risk it. What just happened? His impulsive rage has gotten the attention of his captor, who is again rattling at the handle, trying to get in. "Are you okay?" "What the hell do you care?" Elijah yells back, his hand shaking a little from the pain of the impact and the cuts all over his fist from the glass. Elijah stares at his hand and grips a shard of glass protruding from his wrist. He takes a deep breath and pulls it out quickly, biting his lip at the pain. He expects if he lets out that he's hurt himself, this stranger might be more determined to break in. "Look, I'll let you stay in there, and I'll leave you alone until you're ready to talk, but you have to promise you aren't going to hurt yourself." Elijah ignores him and looks at his hand, which is covered in blood. The pain is horrible, but it makes Elijah feel a sense of pride at his own strength. Survival instinct really changes a person and what they can endure. He raises his head to look at the broken mirror and notices it was the door of a cabinet. He pushes the broken cabinet door open, not sure of what he's looking for, but something is telling him he'll find his answer in here. There are a lot of bandages and containers of pills. He knows his first thought should be to bandage his bleeding wrist, but he's drawn to the labels on the pill containers. "Why didn't you kill me? Do you need me alive?" Elijah licks his lips, wondering if escaping isn't the best option. If failing to escape means his captor could kill him, or worse, then what is the point? He can't stand the idea of being tortured. Worst case scenario has never been death to him. It's the thought of being tormented on the brink of it. If this person needs him alive, and there's even the slightest chance of torture, Elijah knows what he'd rather do. "I want you to be alive. That's why you're here," the man says. The warning on one of the pill containers reads, "Do not take more than 2 in the space of 8 hours. Following that is some fine print Elijah ignores. It's almost like a message telling him just how to remove himself out of the situation. He shakes it. It's clear by the sound and weight that there are more than 2 tablets in there. The rattling of the pill container must have attracted the attention of the person on the other side of the door. He attempts the handle again, sounding frustrated as he says, "Can you please open this damn door?" Elijah glances over towards the door and shrugs, then opens a container. He considers taking the rest of the tablets. He counts them out. 12 altogether. "Seriously, open this door right now," the voice demands. "I don't think so. You won't get anything out of having me here. I'd rather die," Elijah says, with a bitter resignation in his tone as he picks up the first small, round, light blue tablet, inspecting it in his shaky fingers, wondering if he's really capable of doing this. "Open the door. You need to trust me. Open the door and let me help you." The stranger again sounds desperate. "I'll take care of myself. You don't get to hurt me." Elijah quickly takes the first tablet, cupping water in his hands and sipping it to help wash it down. With a peace-willing breath, he grabs a container of pills, pouring a few more into his hand. "I won't hurt you, I swear," the man yells. Elijah takes the next tablet and smiles as it slides down his throat. That's 2. Anything more than that is against the warning label. He'd seen enough drug talks in health class at school to know that overdosing and death go hand in hand. "How many should I take?" Elijah asks himself quietly and frowns. "To be sure," he starts, then impatiently tips the rest into his mouth, trying to swallow them all. He smiles when he swallows the last of them and slowly drops beside the counter with the pill container still in his hand, already feeling numbness settle in. Or maybe it's just the weakness of an empty stomach, the adrenaline crash and the bleeding from his wrist all taking effect at once. He closes his eyes, feeling successful and waiting for the blissful world of eternal darkness to surround him. He feels his body becoming weaker and starts shivering again. He tips his head back, welcoming the blackness that clouds his vision as the surrounding noises drift away, leaving him in a peaceful silence. When Elijah's eyes open again, he feels groggy and his body is numb. The ground below him is cold, and he can feel the glass he'd broken earlier under his hand. He coughs and looks around, horrified and disappointed to see the bathroom he'd so desperately tried to leave. Elijah hates himself now for swallowing all the pills. He can't move his body at all, apart from his head. Even the thought of moving is painful. His head is throbbing and all his muscles seem to ache. The room is piercingly bright, and Elijah figures he's been asleep for at least a few hours in his self-inflicted coma. With a painful lurch towards the toilet, he clings to the seat and vomits, his bile brightly coloured from the pills. He hears two voices now, though one sounds as though it's coming through a phone, and he can't quite make out what is being said. He recognises the voice that had been asking him to open the door, then hears footsteps coming towards the door. He lets go of the toilet seat and falls back against the wall weakly, then notices the pill container has rolled over to the open bathroom door while he'd been passed out. To his shock, the person who appears in the doorway looks more worried about Elijah than he is about seeing this dangerous stranger. Elijah feels uncomfortably safe when he sees the way this man seems so confident standing before him. He doesn't look much older, though he's dressed like he's just come home from an office job. His short brown hair is gelled back out of his face, and there's a perplexed expression in his soft brown eyes. He doesn't look like a killer, but looks can be deceiving, so Elijah has to assume that this man, at the very least, has it in him to murder someone. Elijah tries to move, but his body seems as though it is near paralyzed from whatever he'd taken, his muscles too heavy to shift. "Oh, thank God you're conscious. Are you okay?" the man asks, looking deep towards Elijah's eyes. Elijah averts his gaze, not wanting the man to see the fear and vulnerability in his eyes. In his peripherals, he sees the man picking up the tablet container that had rolled to the door. "You shouldn't have done that," the man says, with a weary sigh, rubbing at his forehead. "Leave me alone," Elijah says, his words slurring as his eyelids feel heavy, though he wills himself to not give in to the pull of sleep. The man's lips quirk into a gentle smile as he says, "Oh, let's not start that again." That's chapter 1.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's so different than the other stuff you've read in the past for us.
Very different, yeah.
This dark room. Oh my God.
Jules, we can't hear you. You're muted. There we go. Go ahead, Jules.
So what made you choose to write that rather than the other style that you were doing?
Well, like I said, I started writing that one about 12 years ago. So that one's been like a long project for me to work on. And it was sort of a style that I was more drawn to at the time. It's just one that I've sort of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to go back to and perfect. So, yeah, and then the boy band romance is actually the style that is completely different for me to write because that's the more recent thing. This was the kind of stuff that I used to get into. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Very, very cool. Now, would either of you two like to do reading? Reese or Adam?
I'm trying to figure out what to read this go around. I haven't gotten anything ready from the new book yet. So I'm like, what do I want to read that's not, well, what do I want to read in general?
Whilst you're looking for that, so Pat's been amazing. And I've messaged Pat separately. She's got family, so she's dipped out. And Melanie's had to go and sort out her allergies. So it's just the 4 of us for now. So it's all right. So we all write very differently, obviously. I think every author has their own unique style. And I think one of the most difficult parts of writing is finding that style and being confident in the style. And there's so many people who have so many opinions about what you should write and how to write and when you should write and what you should do and the routine you need to get into. You need to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning and write for 4 hours solid and then do a whole day work and then come home and write for another whole 8 hours. Stupid. And there's a lot
stressful.
Yeah. But also there's a lot of very disparaging comments that I see about independent authors. And it's quite sad that lots of authors, there's some really, really good authors that just get missed because there's so many authors out there. and it tends to be people who have scandals tend to do well. So you need to have a scandal, Claire. You know,
Drama sells.
yeah,
Drama and sex
drama.
sells books.
Yeah, go take drugs for you or something. So people like that, or people who are already celebrities who, tell their story. They do really well because people are nosy and they like to know what's going on. And that could be really difficult for people who are none of those things, who are literally trying to get started, and it can be an incredibly frustrating journey. Publishing is a funny, very fickle business, and it's very difficult as well because, like, publishers roughly publishing process roughly takes about 18 months, depending on the publisher, depending on what the work is, depending on what needs to be done, depending on the author, depending on the working environment. There's so many different things there. And so even that can just be difficult to work with. And it really does put lots of people off. And then the other thing that I found that puts people off is publishing websites tend to have that non-solicited not accepted. Unsolicited, not accepted.
Right.
So basically, you have to have an agent, and your agent is going to cost a load of money. And it's just, again, it feels like it's trying to drag suck everything it can out of the author, all of the ideas and creativity to make money off of it, and hardly any of that goes to the author. And it's a very unfair system. And lots of people go into writing thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to be like J.K. Rowling. I'll be, really, really well off with Stephen King. But I mean, they are like 0.1% of all authors across the entire globe, which is sad, but the truth. And so that in itself, knowing that statistic, can be very off-putting for authors. However, I think if you have an idea, whether it's like Pat, where she had this desire to try and make changes in a system that's clearly broken or not functioning, and she wants to get the story out there to help other people, or whether you just have a fiction story in your head that wants to, speak to the teenage audience about boy bands, for example, or you want to speak to adults about their sex life, Reese, or Adam, and getting in touch with, your sexuality. I think that they are all really important voices to be heard, and to just my thing would be just don't get put off by it. Just keep trying.
Well, I think that's a big part of what we do. We here at the Book Slam, we're all about encouraging people to write, to be creative, to celebrate the independent authors. We love published authors too, but the independent publishing companies, the independent things. That's what we want to do. So, yeah, I get how people want to compare themselves to like Stephen King or whoever else, but like we need to celebrate where we are at the moment and what we're working on right now. And back to inspiration, what you were just saying a second ago, Jules. Claire, I know it's been 12 years, like you said, but what led to the inspiration behind the kidnapping story? Was there a movie or a TV show or anything like that, like sparked it? What was the pre-starting idea?
Honestly, God knows what started it.
I know. By this
but
point.
I know that through the time where I've been working on it, there's been a lot of things that have inspired me in different stages of it. So a few years ago, I watched the movie Shutter Island, and I found some of that to be quite inspiring for some of the ways that twists play out in the story. Like little things that you sort of, you don't notice, but then when you get to the ending, you're like, oh my God, that's why this seemingly insignificant thing happened here, or that's what this little bit of dialogue here that didn't quite make sense was about. So yeah, throughout the time that I've been working on it, little things have inspired and changed it along the way.
And that's a great point that I feel like we pick up inspiration. And we've talked about that, Reese. We pick up inspiration from everywhere and have to listen to it in the moment. But that's a good point that we might have some idea that starts the whole process, but then we pull inspiration from all over the place. Real life, TV, movies, other books we've read. Yeah, I feel like we're inspired all the time, especially being around other creative people. Like this kind of event where we just hang out and talk about writing. I think that's inspiring to each other,
Yeah, we tend to trigger thoughts for each other. in that sense.
Mhm.
I had a good one for a chapter yesterday from a scenario that went on. My cousin will know exactly what I'm talking about. I told her this is going in my book. I just want to let you know that right now. So when you get a chance to hear that one, trust me, you'll be in stitches. But yeah, but you're right. It just depends on the situations that are happening around you. Sometimes it's a political climate that'll trigger you to think about things a different way and write things down. Things that have happened in your past that'll trigger things, or just regular everyday conversation.
Yeah. I mean, mine was very much triggered by driving past a tree with two different coloured ribbons on it because we were in the process of going through Brexit. And this was before it all been kind of like the vote had been cast. This was all the build up to it. And the opposing sides had different coloured ribbons. And one was yellow, one was blue. And I just remember driving past it and saw these two ribbons. And it was constant talk in the news about war, that the government was at war with itself, and it was a political civil war and all this kind of stuff. And it really did sort of trigger a few ideas. That, and then I coupled it with my own trauma and how I've kind of in the process of recovery from that, and how long trauma recovery can take, and my interest in psychology all kind of blended together to create what I've now got, which is 2 books, and I'm in the process of writing my 3rd for the series. So, and yeah, it's an interesting process that we go through, I think, with writing. And you're right, Reese. It's literally like anything can kind of trigger that. I think the important thing is being open to it, recognizing that there is inspiration literally wherever you look. And studies have shown if you have a messy desk, you're more likely to be creative.
A messy desk indicates creativeness. Okay, good to know. Good to know.
Boredom and a messy desk. There you go. Those two combined to create creativity. Yeah, I think it's a really important tool. And boredom as well, what we just mentioned, is a really important aspect of writing. I think we underestimate how important boredom actually is. And dreams. I know it sounds really weird. Some people don't remember their dreams. I can lucid dream, which is just amazing. Um, but I love my dreams, even if they're nightmares. I mean, um, I've normally got a weapon in hand of some description, and I'm normally in like some sort of like military group that's taken over or trying to suppress a government or trying to rescue someone or something like that. There's normally lots of gunfights or arrows flying here, there, and everywhere, and lots of soldiers running all over the place, and lots of injuries and blood, guts, and gore. Great, I love it.
I want to sit on the sideline of one of Jules' dreams because this sounds interesting. Just to watch this whole thing play out.
Yeah, they are really amazing. I can remember dreams that I had when I was like 4 and 5 years old. I remember being in the audience during Tudor period in England, which, if you know anything about English history, you know that when you're in a crowd, you know that someone's about to lose their head. And I remember dreaming that I was in this audience during Tudor times and I was watching someone get beheaded. And this was a recurring dream I had every night. And when I was really little and I was having it, it was terrifying. And as I got older, the thought of beheading has always been a bit like, so yeah, that's why I actually have it in my first book because of that reason.
That's quite a dream. That's a lot of source material for writing. That definitely is.
Yeah. I don't know. There is an active or overactive imagination or something else. They found that the cells contain memories. And they think that your DNA contains memories. So whether that was part of it, I don't know. I mean, like my mum, when she was growing up, she dreamt in German. She doesn't even speak German.
That I've never heard of before. That's pretty wild.
Right?
Yeah. She says she remembers the dreams, but she doesn't remember what was being said because she doesn't know German. But every dream was just in German. There's nothing else.
Wow, that's peculiar. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, you're right. Inspiration comes from literally anywhere. I think you just have to be quite receptive to it and quite open to to actually like allowing that creativity to flow. Do any of you get asked about, oh, where do you get all your ideas from?
Consistently.
Yours is understandable.
Look, consistently. And the craziest part is like, so have you? And I'm like, nah, not everything that I write is about me. It's ideas. Sometimes it's other people's stories. But I did get dared once by one of my friends, because this is the same one that dared me to do the first book. And she goes, you know something? You should write down some of these experiences you've had, because I bet they would be really good to read. And I'm laughing because I'm going, you just want me to write this down so you can go back and read it.
Live vicariously through somebody else. Of course.
Look,
Yeah.
all of the names have been changed to protect the innocent. I don't know if they're actually innocent, but
And the guilty, right?
right, exactly. But yeah, so I mean, as far as the writing process goes, for me, it's really just, it starts out with a random idea. Sometimes it's a thought that comes from a situation that's happened. My poetry pretty much comes from different situations that have come up, whether it be my story or somebody else's. So those are a little bit more personal. But as far as my fiction stuff, it comes from different ideas. With Trapped, it came from the idea of doing a short story about 4 friends having a drinking game and they're just spilling secrets. And it started to expand from that point. So I'm like, well, let me just go ahead and run with it and see where it goes. And it just took off. So with the next part of the series, it's an extension of everything, but there's still some new things to come. So I do like that. But as far as overall stuff, yeah, it gets to a place where it's like I said, it's just one of those things where sometimes it just comes from wherever. It comes from random places.
So I like the fact that what you've done is you've kind of taken ideas and thoughts from other people and then recreated them into the story. Do each of the characters in your story, I'm talking about the 4 main characters, do they have, are those experiences that you've heard linked specifically to one character, or we've kind of like blended it all up so that it's kind of like shared equally between them, or did you do it differently?
Well, I mean, initially it was just the development of their friendship. That was kind of where it branched off from, and then their individual experiences. But I feel like for the most part, it may be shared. I feel like it might be a shared experience for each one of them. Mainly
because Jasmine's not based on one specific person with one specific person's details. You mixed it up all in your head and dispersed
basically
what they did. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Each character has their own persona, their own personality, their own zing, to bring you into their personalities. And I really like that about them, because there's no one way to write a character, but I was able to play with all of these different ways to make these characters believable and living, breathing things. And it's so funny because even a friend of mine was saying, she's like, the way you talk about your characters, it's like you're actually watching a movie or you're having this conversation with these people. And I'm like, well, technically I am having a conversation with these people on a regular basis.
They live in our heads.
Exactly. I'm like, they hang out here rent free all day, every day. Well, I might have to start charging rent though, because I mean, we need to get some funds on this. But overall, yeah, I get a lot of pleasure out of that, because I feel like I can go so far with each character, and you get a chance to see a lot of how they developed in the first book, but the second one for sure, you really get a chance to see them coming into their own, because now they're adults and they're living life on a different level that they did while they were in college. So you get a chance to see how much they've developed. Naomi is about to show y'all some things that I don't think y'all have ever seen from Naomi. So this is going to get interesting for her specifically.
What's the time gap between book 1 and 2?
It's continuous. So we're literally flowing in from book 1 to book 2.
But they're talking about stuff from from college in the first book, and they're talking about adulthood in the second book. Is that what it's going to be?
Right. So that means there's going to be a little bit of flashbacks. Specifically for Jasmine, there's going to be some flashback stuff because she's got some things from her past that are coming up. So there is going to be some flashback to her teenage years, and so you'll get a little bit of information on that. But yeah, for the most part, it's going to be strictly them within their adult life, going through these different situations. Anya's got another situation that's popping up with Shane, so that's going to be fun. And Stephanie is literally trying to restart her life. I don't want to go too deep into that because, of course, if I do, I'm going to give away the ending of book 1. But she had a situation that happened, and it's going to, it triggers some things. And now for book 2, she's going to be in that place where she has to figure out, okay, what's the next steps? Because I can't go back where I came from, but I still need to move forward some type of way. So it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Do you have a section of either book 1 or book 2 you'd like to read? That'd be awesome.
Don't have anything from book 2 yet, but I'm working on that.
No pressure on book 2. No pressure.
Fingers crossed. Next Sunday we might have something for book 2 to share.
That'd be exciting.
And it may be the chapter that my cousin triggered from yesterday. Oh my God!
Make sure she's watching if you're going to do that.
Yeah, and invite the cousin. Make sure they get to join in.
Great. Oh man, I can hear her cracking up right now. It's like, really? Is that what you wrote? Yes, I did. So this is going to be from book 1, from Trapped, and it's actually a scene from Naomi. You know what, y'all? I don't even remember exactly where this is, but it's somewhere in the middle of the book. But we'll go ahead and get started. I was sitting at the island with my laptop, preparing my final documents to bring to my advisor. I couldn't believe graduation was so close. I was just 1 semester away from crossing the stage, and things were going great for me. In the midst of my 4th inspection of the information, Nate walked into the kitchen. "What in the world is all of this, Naomi?" he asked, picking up the stack of papers closest to him. "Did you request bonus work to pad your resume even more?" "Of course not. Between volunteering in the finance office at the church, classes, and work, I barely have time to keep up with these exiting documents, and they have to be turned in before the end of the month." I jotted down a note on my notepad to remind me of any pending items for the treasurer. He chuckled, then leaned over to kiss my cheek. "Oh, I'm well aware of how busy you've been these days. Luckily, we still have our trip planned for this weekend, so you can finally relax." "Our trip isn't this weekend. It's next weekend." I read over the log for my volunteer hours and cross-referenced it with my spreadsheet, looking for any missed entries. "My birthday is this Friday, baby." "What?" I glanced over at the wall calendar. Sure enough, there it was, our trip dates written in bold red letters with a heart drawn around it. I couldn't believe I'd forgotten Nate's birthday. I feel like a complete idiot. "Nate, I'm so sorry. I've been so wrapped up in all of this paperwork, civil service test results, job searches. I completely forgot." Nate put his hand over his heart, pretending he was hurt. "I can't believe you've just forgotten about my special day, the day I was born. My heart can't take all of these personal sacrifices for your lofty career goals." I chuckled at his silly act. Nate moved my hands from the mountain of documents and wrapped them around his waist. He placed his own around me in the same fashion. He smiled and said, "It's a good thing you have all weekend to make it up to me." I stared into his eyes, regret eating away at me. I can't go." Nate's playful smile fell. "You can't go? Why not?" "I already made plans to attend a job fair in the UC on Saturday, and the church has prepared an awards presentation for all of its graduates this Sunday. They're expecting me to be there." "Naomi, any other weekend I'm free, but I can't get away this weekend." "We've had these plans for weeks, Naomi, weeks. And now you're saying you can't make it at the last minute?" "Baby, I'm sorry. I wish I could." "Forget it," he said, cutting me off as he pulled away from me with a frown. A storm of emotions danced across his features. "It'll be okay, Nate. We can call the hotel and reschedule." You can't reschedule my birthday, Naomi, he shot back. That's a once-a-year event. You know what I mean. We can still celebrate your birthday, just not as we'd originally planned. Look, Naomi, I know you've had a lot on your plate lately, and I've tried being patient and understanding, but this is unacceptable. Unacceptable? I narrowed my eyes. Am I supposed to comply with some sort of merit scale you've concocted in your mind? Am I being graded for my performance as your girlfriend? Of course. What? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Nate ran his hands over his face in frustration. We were both breathing heavily, tempers teetering too close to the point of no return. He shook his head before he spoke. It's been weeks since we spent time together. I know, Nate, and I'm sorry. I've just been busy, he finished for me. That comment set him completely off. You're too busy for me, but you're never too busy for your girls, are you? That's not fair. You know there have been situations that have come up that needed all of our attention. Maybe, but you're not spending all of your free time on babysitting, work, or them. I gave him a wary look. What are you implying? Don't patronize me, Naomi, he spat. I'm not stupid. Something's not adding up. Every time I try to make time for us, you find every excuse not to see me. You started leaving the room to take calls when I'm here, and when I'm not here, I barely get a text, let alone a 5-minute conversation from you. Hell, you're even dressing differently. And anytime I try to touch you, you make an excuse to brush me off. He took a deep breath before he asked, are you seeing another guy? I jumped to my feet with indignation. Of course not. How dare you ask me that? It's the only thing that's making sense. You've been pulling away from me for months now. I need to know the truth. Are you cheating on me, Naomi? I was speechless, unable to bring myself to answer him. What could I say? I was wrong. Sneaking around with Jasmine had come with a heavy cost, and it was finally coming to a breaking point. Yet I was torn. I wanted things to work with Nate because deep down, I did love him. But I needed to be honest with myself about my feelings for Jasmine. I couldn't tell him about us. I couldn't expose myself, not when I was still trying to figure things out. Still, I owed him an explanation. I have been avoiding you, Nate. With so much going on, I haven't taken time for us like I should. I just feel like I'm being pulled in so many directions at once. There you go again, he said in an irritated tone. Another excuse. Nate, I'm not seeing another guy. I promise. My heart thumped in my chest, knowing my answer was only a half-truth. Then what is it? Why are you doing this to us? The anguish in his voice broke my heart. I wanted to wrap my arms around him, to tell him everything would be okay, that we get through this, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't lie to him anymore. I couldn't hold on to him while I selfishly carried on another relationship in private. I knew what I had to do. I had to let him go. I'm sorry, I whispered as hot tears streamed down my cheeks. I can't do this anymore. You deserve so much better than me. Nate nodded his head, defeat surfacing in his eyes. I guess I won't be needing this after all, he said, reaching into his pocket. When he removed his hand, he turned his palm up to reveal a small blue ring box. My eyes widened as they shifted from his hand to his face. Nate, My voice trailed off as the pain in my heart doubled. I had it all planned out. Once we were settled in our hotel, we'd have a nice dinner on the beach. Then I'd take you out to the pier so we could watch the sunset, and I'd ask you to marry me under the stars. I wanted this weekend to be the beginning of our future together. He opened the box and stared at the ring for a long moment before snapping it shut and placing it back into his pocket. His eyes found mine, and the coldness they held caused me to shiver. I know you're still holding something back from me, but I won't force you to tell me. Just know I love you with everything in me, but I don't ever want to see you again. He grabbed his keys from the counter, took my door key off the ring, then sat it on the edge of the island. Nate, I'm sorry, I repeated. I reached for his hand and he stepped away. The distance between us felt cavernous. Goodbye, Naomi, Nate said. Then he turned and walked away. When I heard the sound of the door close behind him, I slumped onto the bar stool and gave in to the pain that was threatening to suffocate me. I never wanted this. I never wanted to break his heart. This was all my fault. What do I do now? And that's the end of that scene.
Oh man, that was great. And the conflict that she's feeling as a person dealing with her sexuality is it felt really authentic. That was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when you're dealing with relationships, particularly in an adult AIM book, there's aspects that go on in relationships and the complexities of relationships. You can relate to it, whether it's the person who's being wronged or the person who's doing the wronging. You can kind of place yourself in their shoes a little bit and understand their reaction. And I think it also brings up a little bit of anger as well if you are the person who's been wronged and you've experienced that, or you are the person who has been on the other end and you realize actually, oh, maybe my actions did hurt that person in my past. So I think relationships are complex anyway. And you wrote that so beautifully. So
Thank you.
Looking forward to book 2 very much. So.
I wasn't expecting him to walk out and be done with her at the end. That was a surprise.
Oh, the fun part is they get to meet again.
Under bad circumstances?
I won't say bad circumstances, but it is a very interesting scene because he basically figures out why everything went the way it went at the time that they meet. So it's going to be one of those situations where it's Jasmine, Naomi, and Nate in the same scene. And he's like, oh, so this is what's going on. So yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting how everything plays out.
And that's coming in book 2?
Yes.
Awesome.
It must be very interesting writing characters whereby it's in the real world, because I write fantasy. It's not in the real world. And so when you're dealing with actual tangible things that are around us, like coffee cups and desks and all the normal stuff, it must be quite interesting writing a scene or describing what the area looks like, so that your readers really understand and place themselves in position. Almost like a fly on the wall with a little mini camera.
Totally, yeah. With them. Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to make it to where, right. But you have to make it to where it's not a boring thing, because I mean, you can sit there talking about somebody stirring their coffee, but what's happening outside of that? Matter of fact, I actually do have a scene that's similar to that. It is one between Jasmine and Anya. Anya is actually telling this particular scene, and they're having tea at this particular point, and she's watching Jasmine, she's watching her reactions to what's going on, and she's going through the process of explaining to you what she's doing. And then they're sitting down and they're actually having their drinks, and she's watching her with this teacup in her hand, and she just looks kind of forlorn, and she goes, okay, what's going on? Talk to me. So it's fun playing around with daily objects to make them significant when you need to.
Spill that tea.
Even the way they're holding the cup, the way that they sip or slurp, the slowness of that, how quick they drink it after it's been brewed, how they make their tea, all of that, even though it's really minor stuff, all lends itself to understanding the characters a bit more, doesn't it? So, for example, us Brits tend to be quite assertive about tea making and how it should and shouldn't be done. And there's a really good rapper come comedian who I've actually seen in person. He does a whole rap song about making a proper cup of tea called Proper Tea. And it's hilarious because I would definitely recommend you watch it. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you. but it is one of those things, isn't it? That is quintessentially British, that you make tea in a certain way. If someone puts the milk in first, that's just, oh my gosh. And if it goes in the microwave, shoot the thing, blow it up, get rid of the fucker, nuke it. Literally, that's not. Yeah, we get quite so. But that in itself tells you a lot about the character and their needs. You can have a scene. I'm not saying you need to write it, but there could be a scene where there's been a death, and that person has got a cup of tea in their hand, and they're just stirring the spoon around, and just stirring, and then just stirring, and they're not drinking it; they're just holding it, and it's hot and it's burning their hand, but they're just stirring it. And
they're so out of it, yeah.
And so, whereas you could have someone who's in a rush and drinking it, so it tells you so much about the characters, their flaws, their desires, their interests, everything. Yeah, I think the life of objects is very interesting in writing, and yeah, they do hold a place for us. Even something really stupid like a pair of socks or glasses, you know. When you've got the old deer who's got glasses and they're hanging down, you know, the old necklaces that used to.
The chain, yep.
I've still seen a few ladies with those, y'all. I think now it's just more of a Southern thing, but I see a bunch.
Oh no, we have them.
I got a glasses cleaning kit recently, and it came with like all this stuff and a chain. Just, you know, because yeah.
Even weird things like a watch. Okay, so you may not have noticed. In fact, I wouldn't suppose you can, but I wear my watch in a particular way. I wear my watch. Okay, so but wearing a watch in what wrist you wear your watch on says a lot about what hand you normally use, because most people wear their watch on the opposite hand to what they write with. The position of the watch as well. So most people wear their watch like that on the outside. Yeah. People who are in the military, they do that because it stops the sun glinting off of it and causing.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you're in a state where you don't want to be seen.
Yeah. Now, I personally have never actually been in the military, so I'm not going to claim that I have been doing something when I haven't. But every single person in my family that's male has been in the military. So it feels very natural to wear it like this. So yeah. So even that. Sorry, that's irrelevant in the sense of what we're doing. But even that can tell you a huge amount about the person, and or the pocket watch. Do you ever still see someone with a pocket watch?
Rarely, but I have.
Yeah. They're normally like older people, particularly.
I wear a pocket watch when I wear my the suit that I've got on with the horn when I'm wearing the mask. No. I've got a pocket watch that I wear with that suit.
But it goes with the suit, though, doesn't it?
Right. It goes with. I don't wear it with anything else. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, do we have a character with a pocket watch, Adam, in any of these things? I'm trying to think now. Where would that fit?
I don't. Yeah, I didn't think about that. No, I don't have any pocket watches in my stuff. Yeah.
I feel like it would be magical if you did have it. It would be some kind of magical element or a way to transition the power into the watch. I mean, I'm going out there, but that's what I'm thinking.
No, but I mean, this is all important, isn't it? Because although it sounds like we're talking about mundane things, actually they all lend itself to
the storytelling and
yeah, absolutely. You know, even like little hobbies that we have, you know, how relevant that is. They all feed itself into our stories.
I make a big deal about the sun in my book, and I want to say that watching the sun rise behind you, Claire, this whole morning, it was so dark when you first set up, and it's all bright now.
Right?
We watched the whole sunrise with you. That's pretty amazing. But I do that constantly in my book. I keep track of what the sun is doing, and I make mention of it as almost like a character constantly. There's gray clouds that are covering it, or it's rising, or it hasn't quite set yet. I constantly am referencing where the sun is in the sky above. I don't know why, but That's something that's become important in my books. Yeah.
Mine is song.
Oh, what you got, Claire?
I was going to say I do something similar, but like with the moon. The moon often features in my books, so I don't really know why, but I just, yeah, I've noticed it a few times that it comes up as something that I will go out of my way to mention. So
that's awesome. And the birds are chirping and stuff. Oh man, that's awesome. Yep.
It's so loud behind me. I'm sorry.
No, they're lovely. They're doing a grand job of joining in.
It was pretty amazing to hear them chirping while you were reading earlier too. That was awesome.
Yeah, well,
They're like, the sun's up. Hey, we're awake now.
Adam, would you like to read some of your book?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah. I was considering reading something since we were talking about how we start things. I'm way more of a planner. I write notes out ahead of time before I write my chapters, so I do a lot of preparation before I even get into the writing process. I think that the starting is actually the second step. I think all the ideas that we talked about this whole day, that's how you start writing. That's truly your first step. Starting is step 2. And I was thinking I would read the start of one of my books just to sort of go with that vibe, but I kind of want to read something more interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's lots of murder at the beginning of my books, but I think it'd be fun to jump into one of these other parts. So yeah, I'll read some. That'd be fun.
Excellent. All right, I'll put you on solo as per,
Sure.
and off you go.
Cool. Hi, everybody. So I have self-published these 2 books, The Mantis Variant and The Mantis Equilibrium. They take place in a dark, futuristic world. It's not really sci-fi. It's not advanced technology stuff. It's more like it is in the future, but technology has sort of failed us. A small percentage of people have started developing superpowers, and that makes them a target because other people can steal their powers by murdering them. So there's lots of murder in my books. Yeah, that's quite a theme. And actually, I'm going to read a scene from my computer. I pulled it up earlier, and I wasn't sure if that's what I was going to do, but it is. I'm going to start with this. So this is a treat. This is part of book 3. So no one has actually heard this yet. This is the debut for book 3. So again, the book is called The Mantis Variant. Book 2 is The Mantis Equilibrium. I'm going to read from The Mantis Corruption, the beginning of book 3. And since we're talking about the beginning and starting, I actually did write this first. My other books, I did not write my intro first. I wrote characters and I started developing stuff, but I knew where I was going with this story. So I actually started at the start, which is unusual for me. So, The Mantis Corruption, Chapter 1. Sumi and Hurricane did not refer to their commander by his title. The 2 of them simply called him the Voice, and in the compound where they were soldiers, his words were like an omnipresent presence. "Wake up, twins," crackled the Voice. "Your commander orders you to prepare. It is time." Sumi and Hurricane were not twins. They were not the same age. The 2 were not even related. But because neither of them was human, and they were both women, twins was the term that the officers and medics called them. There was disdain and dismissiveness when anyone in the staff or crew said it, and for years the 2 young women were referred to by the insult. "Twins," the Voice repeated. "Your commander orders you to be outside the bunker in positions 4 and 7 in 90 seconds. The Voice then fell silent. Sumi and Hurricane followed orders without dispute. They exited through the steel doors that led out into the misty moorlands between the base where they lived and the great river. A moment later, they were in 2 separate locations, and they both fell still. They waited. The dark of the night was quiet. Sumi and Hurricane knew what to do when the order was given. "Engage," said the Voice. Sumi disappeared, and Hurricane launched herself forward at a full tilt run. The soles of her feet glowed, and she barely touched the ground as she ran. Sumi appeared at the distance ahead of Hurricane. She looked back at the young woman, who was running far faster than any human possibly could, and Sumi vanished again. Their targets were not far. Sumi stepped out of nothing and back into reality on the banks of the river. She peered upstream through the darkness and then down the river's opposite flow, but there were no signs of anyone or anything. No boat floated on this stretch of the river, and no houses lined its banks. The houses that did sit close to the water's edge were not in sight, but they were not far. Sumi and Hurricane were punished anytime they went too near to the residences. Then, there they were, the targets. Sumi exited the world again, and she re-entered it right in front of two naked men. They were racing through the soggy countryside like a pair of hunted rabbits. Their bodies were bruised and bloody, and they were barefoot. The appearance of Sumi startled them so much that they both fell to the ground. Terror was in their eyes, and they scrambled over each other to get up and run and try to run. Hurricane suddenly appeared with a flash from her illuminating feet and the glow of her vicious photon blades. They protruded from each of her hands. One of the naked men screamed as Hurricane collided with him and slashed with one of her light knives. His arm was lopped off and went hurtling through the air. He fell to the earth. The other man watched in helpless horror as Sumi grabbed his wrist and she unarmed him as well. She stepped out of reality and took his forearm with her. His limb was simply gone. Geysers of gore gushed from both men's severed stumps, but neither of the women were finished with their victims. The two men tried to flee. Hurricane swept her hands through the air, and a flurry of countless tiny daggers of lumen energy impaled one of them. He gurgled and collapsed to the sodden earth, and his blood pooled around his corpse. Sumi reappeared behind the man who she was disassembling, and she placed her palm on his bare back. Again, she left the world, and again, she took a chunk of her target. He made a shrill noise as his shoulder vanished into nothingness. His entire second arm now flopped to the ground. He wheezed and coughed as blood flowed from both of his missing limbs. Sumi's next removal ended the man. She stepped through reality and took his head. As she disappeared again, the armless and headless corpse convulsed where it stood, then it crashed to the muddy soil. Sumi and Hurricane's task was always simple, to execute the victims put before them. There were rules, guidelines that needed to be followed, but their mission was always the same. With the job completed, Sumi and Hurricane returned to the base. Ending lives became second nature for the two women. Early in each of their imprisonments, both were forced to learn that not following orders came with horrible consequences. Being ignored for fulfilling their duties was preferable to the tortures used for punishment. And I'll go ahead and stop there, because then I go do some backstory and explain who these two characters are. But I feel like that's a fun start to book 3. Ha-ha! Ta-da!
Yeah, that was really good. Oh, yeah. You're muted, Claire. There we go. That was really good. That's very different to the style that you wrote your very first novel in, isn't it? But it leads on nicely from the other two. I actually got your first one from that series here.
There it is. Look at that. That's my book.
Yeah, and
anyway, what I did with my books, I wanted to have a similar a presentation almost, but I did want to do it differently. So in my world, a small percentage of people have started developing superpowers, and the rest of humanity basically has started hunting them. In book 1, the start of the book takes place in a cult, in a really isolated cult. So the reader doesn't need to know anything. They learn with the main character. The first main character has no experience of the outside world, has been lied to her whole life, has been told, has had truths kept from her. And so when you start diving into this story of mine, you don't have to know anything. You're just trying along what's going on, and you learn along with the main character. And then I give you bits of history, and I give you little other things. And I try to do that with each of the other books as well. The first book's in a cult. The second book takes place in a northern mountain village that's also isolated, but very differently than the cult. And yeah, book 3 is a pair of child soldiers who have been abducted when they were prepubescent, kids, and they've been kept in this isolated compound for years and years. So yeah, nobody has to. You can pick up the story sort of at the beginning, and it just sort of lends itself to you as you go.
Nice. So what made you? Well, what inspired you to write that? What was the reason behind choosing to write about that?
Well, I guess the broad answer to that question is after I wrote The Starting End, which is my queer fantasy novel that's not dark, it's light fantasy that Jules's publishing company is going to be releasing next year, 2024, which I'm super duper excited about, and it's going to be so awesome. I'm really, really proud of it. But after that, and I've got a sequel working on for that, but it's such high fantasy and it's so epic and like it's so focused on character development and there's heavy themes like human sexuality is a major theme in the book that when I just sort of turned my creativity to something else, just to turn it on something else, I had no intention of writing horror. It just came out sort of horrific, and I leaned into that and went with the horror, and it was so much fun. And I wrote it so fast. I wrote the first book in like 6 weeks, the second book in like 4 weeks, and the third book I wrote in something like 2.5 weeks. And they're
Wow.
the first book is 190 pages, the second book's 170 pages, and the third book's probably going to be about 190 again. I'm so happy with them. Like they just exploded out of me. Yeah, after I wrote The Starting End and had all that intense writing and themes, that this just fun craziness just exploded. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun craziness. The best way of writing. Fun and crazy.
That's always the fun stuff, though. But I mean, but Adam made a good point. Sometimes when we start off with things, they become something completely different. It takes on a life of its own. You know, even with my project, I started out as a short story. That was my intent, was to leave it as a short story, and that was it. But it evolved. It wanted to be something else, and it became something else. So yeah, there's parts of the process where you might think you're gonna stop, but you realize that there's so much more. There's so much further to go. So you just go with it. You roll with it.
Yeah, I think when you kind of have that inspiration and it strikes you, it's good to be able to get those ideas out, even if it just looks like a complete mess on the page. It doesn't really matter, does it? Because that's not what's going to be presented.
It'll lead to something. Yeah,
literally getting those ideas out so that you've got a record of it. Because once those ideas start flowing, it's easy to forget small things or things that might be relevant or things you might want to include. So yes, it's quite good. Well, I think I could read either a little bit.
Yeah, do you want to read something? Yeah.
Yeah, can do. All right. So this is from book 1 of my dark fantasy series, and we find Ray has managed to escape from the castle. She's unfortunately had to leave her sister behind because they got separated in the escape, and so she's now suffering from, the sort of the second grief of losing her, but now blaming herself for it. And she's also quite scared because she's on her own. She's developed this fear of being on her own, and she feels completely incapable of being able to manage on her own. So what I've tried to do is do it so that she ends up going into the forest, where she happens to overhear 2 young lads talking, and she has this desire to stay with them, even though she doesn't want them to know she's there. She just needs to know she's got someone nearby. And so I'm kind of starting midway through a chapter. I'm not starting at the beginning of a chapter. So I'm starting at a point where she's sort of woken up, and she's now going to start following them to see where they're going. Okay. A thick fog had descended across the ground. I'll put myself on the screen, actually. Sorry. I forgot about that. I always do that, don't I? Forget about me. Okay, so this is from book 1 of Thorns and Demons. Okay. A thick fog had descended across the ground. It was like a blanket that enveloped all but the trees as it swirled around their trunks. It meant that I was hidden from anyone glancing in this direction. At least I had slept a little. A male voice from further away floated through on the gentle breeze. I strained to hear, and it sounded like the soft tone of Raven. Were Raven and Spud still in their spot? I knelt and scrutinized the fog at the space where their voices had come from, but it was empty. It was dawn, and the sun streamed through the bare trees and danced through the fog. It was beautiful and serene. The voice drifted through the trees again, and it sounded familiar, though I could not place where I heard it. Perhaps if I followed the voice, it might get me some answers. I moved to stand, but then froze. What if it meant more questions? I already had enough of those unanswered. My hair was frizzy from the moisture, and I ran my fingers through it before braiding it, but it just fell into a mass of curls that cascaded down my back. The action caused my stomach to lurch with a wave of nausea that flowed over me. I needed food and water. Listen to the voice again. The voice meant people, and people equaled food and water. If I went in the direction of the voices, then perhaps I could get both. Before I changed my mind, I crept through the undergrowth toward the sound. The forest opened, and the sun was trying to burn through the fog. 3 wooden houses dotted out about in the clearing. 2 young men dressed in pale grey fatigues loitered and leaned against the house closest to where I crouched in the gorse bush. They whispered to one another, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Their deep caramel skin was rich and warm, and their handsome faces conveyed an air of mischief as their eyes sparkled at the plan they appeared to be hatching. I was transfixed. Their easy manner and playful gestures were so different from the serious faces of the young men in Surrey. These couldn't be the boys from last night. These were young men of at least 18. Open-mouthed, I watched as one climbed through an open window in the shack. What were they doing? The one that remained outside lifted his foot to rest on the wall behind him. He folded his arms without a care. His blasé and careless manner reminded me of the way Nelly and I would explore the land. However, I had never entered another's dwelling without permission first, nor had I ever stolen anything. Nelly's traumatized eyes floated through my mind. The hurt and fear they exhumed brought bile to my throat, but I swallowed it back down and frowned. Something seemed off. Sounds of several thumps came from the house, then silence. He's sorted now. The boy peered out the doorway to his friend and smirked. Come now, you can stop being such a fraidy, Spud. I owe you one, mate. Again. Spud smiled at Raven, who shook his head in despair. He's one of them. Raven rubbed his head. How do you know? I asked him. God, do I really have to answer that? They continued in silence, creeping past the small hamlet and followed the well-trodden path through the forest, while I hid behind every root, shrub and log pile to stay out of sight. A short while later they stopped and flopped to the ground. They were tucked away out of sight from both me and anyone else who might stray from the path, but they were still in earshot. Here, I've got some food for us, so at least we'll have something better than what we're rationed with. And when they hit that settlement, we'll be ready, okay? It sounded like Raven's dulcet tone. Silence followed, and it seemed they were eating whatever Raven had stolen from the house. Hey, you ready? Raven's voice broke through their silence after several minutes. All the while I was battling whether to ask them for some food. Yeah, hey, you think the soldiers will be there yet? Soldiers? Why were they going to the soldiers? The dark grey uniform of the executioners flashed in my memory, and I shuddered. Elias, the envoy. Could those be the soldiers they were talking about? I just worry what will happen to us or her, that's all. Spud sounded scared as his voice wobbled. Hey, you don't do any of the work anyway. Raven's laugh floated through the air, and it warmed my chilled body a little. The 2 left their hiding place, gazing around them for any life, but there was none that they saw. Raven, I'm going to get you for saying that. Spud leapt from the bush and towards his mate, who swiftly turned out of the way and sent Spud flying into another bush. You couldn't chase your grandma even if she had no legs. Raven chuckled and continued walking past Spud, who had remained crouched on the ground, a broad and easy grin on his face. As Raven passed his friend, he turned, so he was walking backwards. I froze and hope they didn't see me crouching in the undergrowth. Raven pulled a face and turned back to Spud and to continue walking, his hands in his pockets. Catch this then, you dipshit. Spud lobbed a massive pile of mud which hit Raven's thick black locks and perched precariously on his head for a second before dropping one lump at a time to the floor. It sent Spud rolling on the floor in giggles until Raven grabbed the dung from the ground and rammed it down back of Spud's clothes. It was Raven who then fell about giggling as he wiped his head and face and looked down at Spud, who met his gaze as they both smiled at each other, and I couldn't help but grin too. They seemed harmless, fun and warm, and I would have leapt out of the bush to introduce myself had it not been from their comment about the soldiers. If they're part of the envoy, they were my enemy, and I needed to know more before I put myself in danger. The coldness of the cell had not yet left my heart, and my tormented smell wafted up my nose. Go away! Leave me alone! Focus on these two. Forcing my eyes open, I watched them both. Come on, mate! Raven held his hand out to Spud, who grabbed it, and Raven heaved him up from the floor. I don't know about you, but I could do with a bath before we get to the training ground. Been saying that to you for a while now, mate. How about how much you smell? Shame it took some horse shite to get you to make that decision. Maybe it'll mask it instead. Spud grinned and then ducked as Raven swung at his hand toward his face. Careful, mate, you're getting slow. Raven feigned and landed a playful blow on Spud's stomach, who dutifully pretended to be injured. Giggling, they jogged away from me, and I was left using their voices and liveliness as a guide to the edge of the forest. I'm going to stop there.
Yay! So that was Ray's first time meeting Raven?
Yes.
Got it.
That was the first time she met him. Well, she didn't meet him, but
right.
Yeah. So basically, Spud and Raven are twin brothers. They're not identical twins, but they are twin brothers. And sadly, the thing that they're walking towards is actually part of the initiation ceremony that the envoy used for their soldiers. And Raven and Spud have actually signed up, not because they want to join the envoy, which are the enemy, but because they want to actually save their sister, who has been forced into it, and as a child soldier. And so they've spent 18 months tracking her down, and they just happened to kind of cross paths where Ray was. And the initiation ceremony is basically, if you're going to be part of this group, then you have to pass this. And what the passing is, they have to literally sack a village to the ground and kill everyone. And basically, it's kind of like, it's brutal. And so Ray is obviously at the moment extremely cautious because she thinks that they are envoy soldiers now, even though they seem harmless to her at the moment. And this is basically the lead up to the rescue for their sister, Ash.
I like this. Go ahead, Jules.
Sorry, no, go on. Say that again.
Oh, I was going to say I like this scene because it actually shows you that they're really kids. Even though there's so much other things that are happening to force them out of their true identities at that particular point, it just shows you that they're just kids being kids in that moment.
Yeah. There's a couple of scenes where there's snowball fights and things as well. And I've tried to do it so that it really does represent, these are actually just children that we're talking about, but they are thrust into an adult world and have to suddenly make decisions. And it leads into book 2 where Ray makes some terrible decisions. But she does that because she's been thrust into this world and she has no guidance. She doesn't know what the right thing is to do. So yeah, I've tried to do it so that it kind of really does demonstrate that. So that's really nice. And we have also come to the close of our lovely podcast. It's been I've really enjoyed it today. I know. Till next week, till next Sunday. It's all right. We'll be back.
A lot of good reading today. A lot of good reading. Interesting discussion across the board. This was a fabulous show.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us, Claire. And obviously, Melanie, thank you very much for joining us. I know she's actually watching us. It was a pleasure having you on. And also Pat as well. Thank you so much for being a guest too. I think it's really interesting, to talk to different people about the writing process and what we've learned and tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to say fare thee well. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, night, good night, bye, good morning, afternoon, bye.